Hello and welcome to this morning/afternoon session on securities. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of research advisory firm Firebrand Research, and I'm here with a panel of experts to discuss T+1 settlement and beyond. Now, I have strict instructions here. I have my iPad. Please do use the Slido app to submit any questions that you may have to our panel. And also, we'll be doing a bit of interactive voting in a while. So please do get your mobile devices out and handy. Now, today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Super Mario land of the securities industry, if I like to think about it. If I'm trying to be entertaining here, because it's a dry topic sometimes. We're talking about the plumbing. We're not going to be talking about Mario and Luigi, but certainly it's something that is very important to our industry. Now, mid-last year, we saw security settlement as a topic on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I did not think I'd live to see that happen. So certainly that's an interesting development and certainly means that the plumbing is very important to the industry and the wider market out there. Now, we have spent a fair amount of time hearing from the US politicians. They had a lot of interesting questions to ask about why the plumbing is the way it is. Why do we have a T+2 settlement for securities? And I think some interesting questions were asked about what the heck is a CSD, but we're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about whether T+1 is a stepping stone to a shorter settlement cycle. And I'm going to get my panelists to introduce themselves before we kick off. So, Julia, over to you.
Julia Romagni, Global Head of Securities Services at UniCredit.
Javier?
Javier Hernani, Head of Securities Services at Six Group.
Olivier Montpont, I am actually heading the product management for what we call market liquidity.
Pierre?
And Pierre Davout, I run Euronext Securities, which is Euronext CSD business.
Fantastic. And as I mentioned, in the US, there's been a lot of discussion about the move to T+1. We have a sort of provisional date at the moment, although you can go and ask DTCC at their stand whether it's been firmed up yet. We're not sure. But in India, we're also moving. I think it started in February this year. So various parts of the world moving to T+1. But why are we talking about T+1? Julia?
Okay, so there are numerous factors why we are discussing shortening the settlement cycle, and I would highlight three key drivers. First is reducing risk. It's very obvious. So whenever we are reducing the period between trade execution and the settlement date, we are reducing counterparty, market, and credit risk. The last similar move was in 2014 in Europe, followed by the US in 2017 when we moved to T+2 from T+3. And now, since the technology has changed dramatically, I think the industry has the time now to review how we can be more efficient. The second is reducing cost. Reducing firms' exposure over the settlement period definitely will translate into reduction in the margin requirements. According to the DTCC estimation, reducing by 1 day the settlement period, it will turn into 41% CCCP's margin reduction for the firms, which they can better manage their capital and liquidity in this respect. And the third one, which is a very important one, is to make the securities settlement more efficient. We need to see how we can further automate certain processes. We need to review with the current technology what further we can do, how we can further standardize the current processes, how we can do the automation end-to-end, plus how we can use the single data. So, for example, SWIFT introduced and piloted the UTI, the Unique Transaction Identificator. Why don't we use it for the post-trade environment in order to access immediately after the trade executed and then have the single data used by everybody? Why do we have to pass on the same information throughout the value chain? So I would say these are the three key factors. However, there are many others that we are discussing, this shortening the settlement cycle, but I would also let the panel to comment if there is any further comment.
Sure. Olivier?
Well, I think if we are talking about T+1 today, it's because the American and the Canadian and the Indian have decided to move to T+1. So obviously we need to look at it from a market perspective. What does that mean? I also believe that the reason why we are talking about T+1 today is because the technology is available to actually do it. And there are a lot of new well, certainly the legacy technology, the CSE, the settlement. I mean, all platform now settled on real time. So certainly even the legacy platform that we have are capable of doing T+1. They can do T0 without any problem. I think it's really in the whole chain from trading to affirmation, confirmation, all the compliance check, the KYC, all the change that is actually the challenges there. And we have seen over the last few years a lot of new entities, new fintech coming and bridging gaps that are in the chain there. And I think we are probably at a point in the industry where the technology is there to support the shortening of the life cycle. So I think it's both a market decision, a regulatory decision, but also I think it's technology supported changes that will take place.
Sure. So it's more mature. It's more available to the market.
To a certain point, though, I would say, the technology is there, so I think we will use the technology. I think there is also quite a lot of push from those new fintech to try to push the technology as a use cases, obviously, into the chain. So we need to balance the benefit that you mentioned against the drawback of moving to T+1, which is basically shortening the time to actually fix a problem when there is a problem. And obviously that has to be well balanced. Technology will help to streamline the process. The question will really be, will that be enough? And are there enough technology, or are there technology that really fixed where the real frictions are today, or is it just technology bridging gaps, but in between those gaps there are still very major gaps that still need to be handled by people, and people need time to actually operate. So,
Sure, it's a complicated trade life cycle overall, right? Obviously we've seen about 10 tons of paper printed about with various concerns. I know AFME put something out relatively recently around why there are challenges to move from what we currently have by reducing 24 hours out of the cycle. Pierre, maybe you can talk us through some of the concerns that you've heard from your clients, your counterparts.
Sure. So I guess the concerns are mostly around time. It's time constraints which are very difficult to manage in an environment where trades will be settled on T+1. I think the debate T+2, T+1 may be a bit misleading because people tend to think that we are moving from 2 days to 1 day. Actually, it's not at all the case. If we are concrete, in Europe, most of the settlement activity on equities markets is performed in a batch called a nighttime settlement in Target 2 securities. And that batch starts at 8 in the evening preceding the business day, which means that if you settle T+1, it means that actually you will settle at the end of the day following the trade. So this gives you a very few hours to trade, to match the trade with your counterparty, to source the cash and the securities to execute on the transaction. This is the real constraint. You need to have systems in place that are able to process trades real time and not in a batch process. And if you are trading with counterparties that are in Japan or in the US, the time window you have to speak with your counterparty if something goes wrong is extremely limited. So I think the concerns are mostly around how can we, as an industry, overcome these time constraints to avoid this shortening of the settlement cycle, create another problem, which will be increased settlement fails. And in Europe, everyone is now looking at settlement fails and why are the penalties not improving settlement efficiencies and so on and so forth. The worst thing we will do is create a new problem by shortening the settlement cycle. So concerns are around time constraints and how can we manage the time constraints in a smooth way.
Sure. Obviously, when you shorten the settlement cycle in one market, we're a global industry, right? It always impacts other bits of the industry across the globe. Julia, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you were saying, it's not just a simple 50% reduction, right, from 2 days to 1. It was calculated 83% reduction because we will be left in the operational teams 2 hours to match all the trades. And also short positions. So it will turn out after matching what is the short position. So securities lending also come into the picture, which needs to be initiated even within this short period of time. And there is one more aspect which is very important, is the liquidity and the funding question. And especially this is important when it comes to cross-market, cross-border settlement, where there is an FX component. FX is currently concluded once the trade is matched. So again, FX either need to be pre-funded or also should be aligned with the T+1 settlement cycle. So all these components, as you were already saying, into this compressed 2 hours or maybe a bit more will be very challenging. So the concern is that, yes, it will lead to higher settlement failures, which we want to avoid, obviously. So we need to find the right balance when and how we are moving that direction.
Sure. It's unfortunate timing that CSDR settlement penalties have come in just before the potential move here, right? We're all European, obviously, on this panel. There's not been that much discussed. There's been a lot of US discussions about this and Canadian discussions. But what progress has been achieved thus far in our industry readying itself for a potential move? Because given it's the sort of line in the sands around about 2024. Javier?
Well, first of all, I think in this context, the debate is operational risk versus counterparty risk. It's easy to summarize it maybe it's too simple, no? But what are the benefits here? The benefits are coming from less counterparty risk, because we need the less collateral, these kind of things, against the clear operational risk that we will run from going to 12 hours to solve things to 2 hours to solve things. This is the thing we have to balance. In my opinion, first of all, we need to talk to the industry. Yeah? So we need to make a case here that involves as many people as possible, so we know what is the P&L account of this move. So apart from the big notions, which is nice, from going from T+3 to T+2, in my opinion, was getting rid of a buffer that to some extent no one of us, thanks to what we mentioned before, the technology was not using. So it was, let's say, easy to do from T+3 to T+2. T+2 to T+1 clearly is a challenge in terms of investment, in terms of cost, maybe people, technology. So it's not a done deal in many respects. Thanks God we are obviously in a later stage. We have better technology, better processes. But the industry has to say to what extent this is beneficial for them as well. So we need to listen to clients and take to some extent the European perspective. I mean, we took the European perspective when we did T+3 to T+2. That was Europe leading. Now is the US trying to lead from T+2 to T+1 for good reasons. Also because something happened in the US and in the market that we tend to forget that made the whole debate all of a sudden lighten up in the equity market. We remember that. So there might be some, let's say, big local, but local issues in the US, and there are other issues in Europe that we need to look into. No? We're talking about 14 currencies and 31 CSDs in Europe. No? So it's not the same complexity, the one we are facing in Europe, to give a good service to our investors, than the one we live in the US case. So to some extent, we need to have our own view. This is a European panel, as you said very well. But we need to have our own view with respect to our clients, with this balance of a real number, no? Because sometimes when I think of it, the way you increase the efficiency of collateral in the P&L is material, but it's more difficult to calculate than the effect you will have in cost when we're talking about penalties, the new investments, maybe new people, whatever it is. So we need to find a balance in the two elements that make the case a compelling one, in my opinion.
We also have revenue impacts, right? There's not just costs here. So
correct.
Got to think about those too. Olivier?
Yeah, well, just coming back on the penalties and the like. Today, on our books, roughly 50 or 40% of the unmatched transaction are due to, of the failed transaction are due to unmatched instructions. And clearly, if we had to shorten even further the time that we already have to cover those 40% that creates fails, I mean, it will be very challenging. So I think the technology needs to help us there, but we probably need to get the time to get to that level. I'd like to add, because you said it's a balance between operational and credit risk. I think there is a third element, and actually that element has been mentioned into one of the surveys that I read. It's actually from value exchange. And I basically said 49% of the people believe that the main issue will be coming from the liquidity and the financing aspects, including the securities lending business. Because if you shorten the period for settlement, you basically shorten the recourse period as well. And that will become extremely challenging for anyone to actually engage into the securities lending program. I think the agent lender will have to adapt the model to keep a bigger buffer, which basically means less availability. That means less revenues for the lender. So there will definitely be a lot of costs attached to it. And I think certainly when we look at the Europe versus US, I think we certainly have a lot of very specific European challenges. The SFTR reporting that took a lot of energy within the financial infrastructure and the dealers that are to report that. We had the penalties now that has just been launched. We had the Brexit. We had the Ukrainian wars, that's probably global. But definitely there was a lot of development that has been pushed into the financial industry in Europe that has probably been less of an impact in the US. And probably they had been able to use part of that to increase their own efficiency. And I think it's all about, I mean, the T+1 is unavoidable. I think the technology will be there to support it, but we need to have the time. And I think this is really where your consultation with the market, with all the parties, to make sure that actually we have a plan in place that will enable everyone to actually move and get the objective of it, which is basically reduce risks, reduce cost. And if we actually force it too early, I think it will increase cost and it will probably not reduce risk. And don't forget that if you fail in a transaction, it has also that, so you have the penalties on one hand, obviously, that you have in Europe, that you don't have in the US, but on top of that, and that's really for everyone, you get the risk-weighted asset impact of a fail that will also cost you money. So what you gain on one side, you need to balance it, what you could potentially lose on the other one. But on the other side, you can't really go against the wind, right? So it's clearly a direction of travel. We move from T+5 or 7 to T+3, T+2. I think it's clearly a T+1 will be rather soon than later. And by the way, Japan is already in T+1 for domestic market and a T+2 for the international market. And obviously, once you get into a model where you have one country in one model, another country in another model, it comes with other frictions as well. So I think Europe will be forced to move and follow suit what US and Canada and India are doing because they have no choice, because otherwise the friction will increase as well.
We imposed it on them, now they're imposing it on us, yeah? Revenge. I'd like to make sure that the audience is awake out there. So we've got our first poll. So if you can get your Slido apps out, get ready to vote. And our first question is, how soon after North America moves do you think Europe will move to T+1? 1 year or less? Unlikely. 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, more than 5 years, or we'll stay at T+2? And that's my question to the panel also. I think I'm going to start with you, Javier, on that front. I think the US moved 3 years after we moved in Europe for the move to T+2. When do you predict we'll move in that direction? And
I would estimate around 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. But I'm an ambitious person. Maybe someone would say it's too ambitious. But I think we need to be in the current environment, we need to be ambitious. Because when we are talking about instant payments, it's always difficult to explain why we are still in T+2. So I think we need to move forward. How and when, that's the next question. And we would need to accelerate that. And when we were moving, I mean, I started my career in 1991 when we were happy to settle on T+5. I never thought that I would be in a panel discussing how we are moving to T+1. So probably, maybe we are not so eager discussing, okay, when it is going to happen, but I believe it will happen. The question is just the time, of course.
Sure. Yeah?
Yeah, I'd like to add one nuance maybe. We discussed T+1, T+2 as if it would apply to all asset classes in the same way. And in reality, what we see in other markets, especially the US, is that the US government securities market is already T+1. Some parts of the money market in the US are also T+1, whereas the equities market is T+2. So we may very well have a scenario where we move to T+1 for some asset classes first, and then move to the more complex asset classes as a second step. And I think the experience of India is quite interesting. What they have decided to do is to move to T+1 in batches. So first they move the less liquid stocks, and then the medium liquid stocks, and the most liquid stocks will migrate to T+1 at the end. So of course this stage approach goes with its own drawbacks, because then market participants have to manage several settlement cycles for the same geography. But I think we should, in the scenario planning that the industry has to do here in Europe, I think we should not rule out a phased approach and a phased migration to T+1 alongside the Big Bang approach that we all have in mind, because this is how we moved from T+3 to T+2.
Sure. And as you say, though, there are certainly complications in that, not least of which in India, I think, is that there was some discussion between the exchanges, the market infrastructures there that were not quite on the same page, let's say, during that process to begin with. And then you think about it at the European level, that's going to be very complicated, right? Javier, did you have some comments on that?
I think it was very interesting answer from you, and it's better to be anonymous there and answer the question in a whatever way, no? Let me answer it in my own way. If it's more than 5 years, why don't we do it in another technology?
Right.
So if it's more than 5 years, why don't we take the bridge we advance the US and we go to digital, rather than investing more into legacy technology? Why do we run operational risk like the one we are describing, if the digital environment can actually provide with the safety in terms of so many things, no? Through smart contracts and the likes? So that we invest in the next technology, not in the existing one, if it's going to take more than 5 years. So obviously we need to compete. Obviously I'm with you, that we need to follow. There's no way we can probably avoid that. But if it's going to take longer, and we will probably witness that in the US as well, whether they fulfill the 24 date or not, maybe it would be more interesting to stop and think, what is really the best environment and the most efficient one to go to T+0? Next question. In the sense, is this really worth it? Is it really worth it from the P&L perspective again to do that in this way, or to do it in a way that we are really disruptive here and we really try to minimize all the problems that we're talking about? It's an open question. I don't have obviously a clear solution. We run, as you know, a digital exchange already in Switzerland. We know the technology works, but obviously there's a lot to be done until we get there. I obviously understand that. And there's a lot of investment also from the participants to get to the level of being fully digital. No? But the question is, to me, it would be more strategic is if it's a short-term thing and we can really push this into a short period of time and compete with the US, okay. If not, maybe we should think about outside the box, or in the box, in the sense of saying, let's go to the next technology. No?
Sure.
Actually, I really like what you said. I think it's an interesting point. I still believe, though, that because of the US and the Canadian will be in T+1, the move from T+2 to T+0 will probably not happen. We'll have to go through a T+1 just to catch up with what is happening in the US. What is pretty clear, though, is that we will not stay in T+2, and I think we had a user group a few weeks ago, and that was, unanimous answer that if the US are moving, we'll have to follow. There is no choice to it. But it's also true that there are a lot of asset classes that are not being concerned today. The derivatives today are still swaps still in T+2. The FX is still in T+2. And obviously, you need FX to do financing. You need swaps to cover your synthetic. So all those things are, and DR, and then you have fund. The whole, how do you settle this? How do you harmonize the settlement if there are, very diverging type of, settlement cycle in between those instruments, when actually there might be exactly the same instrument. So, and certainly the multi-listed between the US and Europe will be very interesting. That will create arbitrage opportunities. Arbitrage opportunities is basically somebody is losing money to a professional, right? So the investor, the buy side, the one who should be protected in these things, will be losing money and giving money away to intermediaries. So good for them, but the reality is that that's not the direction of travel that the regulator should endorse. I'm actually quite surprised that they haven't discuss a little bit more between the US and Europe, whether they should be doing it at the same time, or maybe they did and they just disagreed on the timing. But when I saw what they were able to do for the unclear margin rule, for example, where you have full alignment across the world of a timing with sequencing and the like, I'm surprised that for something that is that big, that important, they haven't been able to come up with something more coordinated.
As we all know, though, global markets don't always move in the same direction at the same time, and it's very hard to get people to agree to something, and a date is almost impossible. It's hard enough at the European level, right?
Yeah.
When you think about it. We should see the results, see who's... we've got some very... Well,
so the audience is much more ambitious than I was.
Ambitious. Yeah, not many people are saying it's going to stay at T+2, but some do. That's interesting. What happens to competition in global markets if we do? Probably not going to look so good for us in future. Now, you've referenced it already. The SEC's proposals in the US seem to indicate that they want the direction of travel to move to T+0, but T+0 can mean many different things. We don't have an industry standard taxonomy, another bugbear of many of us, about these things. What do we mean by T+0? Is this netted T+0? Is this instant? Javier, what does it mean in your eyes?
I think there will be a stage approach like the one you mentioned, in terms of how do we do that? Either we do fully digital, and then we do it at atomic settlement, which deserves another panel, because obviously this has a lot of implications in many things we do, and this is a complete game changer. Or we go into a kind of a selection of batches during the day, so we can actually net during the day, which is probably very complex, but doable in either in digital or in today's technology, maybe. That I think it will be either we go directly to a digital environment where let's say from the beginning we already offer it with everything that comes with it around the atomic settlement situation, which is obviously a pre-funding story that is really important. It's not only with T+1, which is obviously already very important. This is already completely changing the way we fund trades in this moment, and also getting rid to some extent of the clearing beauties of today, which I'm not totally convinced, in the sense that clearing has helped so much the industry to go forward, to heal many stories. I always say that clearing is the best human invention after penicillin, probably, because of the healing capacities, to go through the very difficult times. But we need to see how technology adapts to that and how we get the good things of both. Not an easy track, but in any case, either we go digital in that environment, or I think the operational risk would be too high, in my opinion.
Sure. Central clearing got us through the pandemic, I think, as well, right? And not much of the market volatility that we've seen. Julia?
I fully agree what you were saying, but we would need to do the in-depth analysis, which would really make sense. I think both options could be on the table. So netted settlement would be in batches, more complex probably. Instant is complex because cash and securities would need to move simultaneously. I believe current technology is still not there, or those which are there are still not widely used. So we need to have a proper business case for everybody throughout the chain, which is the investment, the right investment, and which is the right option for the industry as of today. But obviously, if we look further, I think instant settlement will happen.
I agree.
Sure. Should we ask the audience? There's a poll, another poll. Get your apps out. Do you think the move to T+0 is inevitable? Yes or no? Easy. And you can take it to mean netted. You can take it to mean real time. We'll ask you that later. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe one comment on the continuous instant settlement. I think we all have in mind what happens in the crypto world, where you can trade 24/7, and then you settle instantaneously after the trade. in capital markets, especially on the equities markets, it's not like trading is a continuous, permanent activity, right? You have trading hours, and what we see, or what we saw over the past years, is that actually the share of trading which happens not in the continuous trading session, but at the very end of the day, during what we call the closing auction, has increased, which means that the trajectory we take now on the price formation and the liquidity formation is less continuous trading and more, let's say, batch trading in one go, where all sellers and buyers are interacting with each other at one point in time. So I think we need to be conscious of that trend in the trading universe, which means that, to come back to the point on netting, I mean, if you do continuous settlement, right, you will miss 25% of the trading volumes for the netting, and therefore the need for liquidity and cash will increase big times. So maybe at some point we'll have 24/7 trading on European cash equity markets, maybe, but now it's not really the direction we take, and therefore the settlement solutions we bring for this market should be aligned to some extent with what the trading community wants to do.
Sure, very important.
It's interesting to, I think netting has a lot of value, right? And certainly from a credit perspective, I mean, as a custodian, we do extend credit to customer. If they buy, they buy, they sell, they buy, they sell. If you look in real time, you need credit lines to buy, and then you get the money. And potentially you have two buys in a row before you start selling, and you actually need even more credit. The netting aspect, whether it's a clearing, house being there to netting all the things, or a CSD, the batch aspect is very efficient from that perspective. So moving into a full real time without any kind of mini batches stuff, I think from a settlement perspective will be very costly from a credit point of view. So for me, that's certainly something we need to look at. Not saying it's unavoidable. I think history will tell, because when we did the T+3, we also thought that will be the last move, and T+2, etc. So I think it's important to look what the technology will allow us to do in the future. But certainly from a financing perspective, I still believe that if you need to finance a position, if you need a market maker that can actually give you a price, even though they don't have a stock available to give you that price, I think it's very important. They are really the one bringing the liquidity, and if they cannot find a way to actually refinance themselves, to borrow those securities, etc., it won't work. And then maybe one more thing is, if you move, the cash market into a T+0 point, you still have a lot of things that will be terms, right? So you still have all the derivatives that are longer term. You will still have repo with a far leg and a near leg, etc. You will have securities lending. So I think what we really need to do is make sure we focus on how do we manage that risk. That will anyway be there, right? So we will continue to have risk, term risk. I mean, counterparty risk will not disappear because you move in T+0 for cash equities. And what about all the options? So I think it's really, we need to stop probably at the point, and I'm not saying it's not to be T0, right? But certainly there are other ways to reduce risk today that are probably more compatible with the way the industry is working today, allowing for financing, funding, etc. And the T+0 might not necessarily be the right answer to that one. I think the risk management of a T+ whatever is probably another way to achieve the same risk reduction.
Sure. And maybe just one more thing, that I think we always needed a trigger why we were moving from T5 to T3 and T2 now to T1. And maybe there is something we don't see, right? So when we were settling T5, carrying luggages and papers with trains, we could not imagine that demat securities will exist. And then dematerialization came, faxes were coming. So all these things triggered a change in the value chain. Now we say it's very difficult for the instant. Yes, it is, but it's possible to do it. There are already existing platforms, there are already existing markets where you can do instant settlement, instant buying government securities. You can already do that. So this is something I think going to trigger, and we will need to adapt to that, and the whole chain will need to change the mindset in this respect, and this is very difficult because we still do not know what the right technology will be.
Sure. Let's take a pause and see what the audience thinks quickly before we get back and say, oh, okay. Not everybody in the room is convinced that we're going to move to T+0. Okay, so not everybody out there is a DLT vendor. Good. In terms of market infrastructures, obviously I'm aware that we have plumbers, not Luigi and Mario, but the industry plumbers here on the panel, and I have to ask you what happens to market infrastructures in that eventuality of a T+0 market. Javier, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think that we basically covered it. I think we need to offer it. We're going to need to offer it. It's going to come. I mean, if you look at my children, children already grown-up people, no? Everything is instant. So one of the things that we need to take into account is that we are sitting here in a legacy industry, in the sense that we will be competing with other asset classes, with non-regulated markets, with things that we need to basically take it with us, because otherwise they will have their own life. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, investors will be facing with warrants, derivatives, bonds, equities, fine. But what about the rest of the asset classes? What happens if the next asset future is completely big time out of today's channels? And these guys, or these markets get organized on an instant payment thing, like the rest of the instancy in which we live today. No, they will be actually competing with us as plumbers, as banks, as everything else. No? So either we look into that and also try to make technology a friend of us, or we might be competing against technology to some extent and against other participants, other markets, non-regulated, other kind of assets. Take the currency element. Who would have thought 20 years ago there would be this kind of cryptocurrencies competing with the dollar and the euro? Not competing. I mean, I know what I'm talking about. Huh?
That's a stretch.
Not at this stage. And making our central banks thinking that they have to do CBDC. Nobody. And all of a sudden, the central banks really have to respond or have to be thinking about how to compete or how to be in the currency space against completely private, non-regulated offerings that are happening in the market. If you take that to our world in terms of securities and asset classes, either we adapt and we engage with the technology and we make it happen and work, also with I would say with the traditional securities world, or we might be confronted with people who want to invest into something that is instant, and to a bit, let's say, larger extent. And this is the new generation that is there doing all the time. This is some payments for 10 euros of buying together a magazine. No? They do 10 euros in front of you. I say, what the hell are you doing? I say, no, I'm paying him the half of the magazine, whatever it is. No? And it's there. So if it is in payments, it's going to happen everywhere else, in my opinion. That's a little bit what it's not a plumbing thing. It's a kind of a more visionary, if you allow me. But it's kind of what I think I'm thinking. Is the correct.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll take the plumbing route then. About the CCP, because I think one common statement is that when we have T0 real-time instant settlement, the CCP is gone. Well, I don't think it's the case, because everyone knows the risk management function of the CCP, collecting margin for the 2 days to come, etc. But I think the CCP has another even more important role, which is to democratize access to the market. With the CCP, you don't need to care about who is your trading counterparty. You can just trade on the market, and then the CCP guarantees the fact that you will settle and your counterparty will settle. And that function is extremely important. And I think even in a scenario where we go all real-time settlement on new technology, etc., there will be the need for an institution or a contract or a technology or a mix of the three to ensure this function of anonymous trading, which has been very important to foster participation to capital markets. So I just like to highlight this because often we assimilate T0 real-time instant settlement with lack of a CCP, which I think is a shortcut.
Right, certainly. Olivier?
Yeah, well, that will be an important discussion. I agree with you. If we move to T0, it's not because we will be able to, well, we will be forced to do it. I think it's only if we can do it that we will move to T0, because I think you have a lot of application, etc., that is more on the C2C type of activity, and I think they are moving to real time. There's no doubt on that. I mean, the industry on the backbone still need to have, a very strong risk profile on the back of it, and I think typically the pre-funding is not an option. And all those things, I mean, having the stock available firsthand. I think in Russia they had, well, probably an unfortunate example, but they did settle in T0, so you only trade what you have in your books. on the settlement, but that basically means if you are not a Russian yourself, you need to have pre-funded everything in advance. And clearly that's not the model that you really want to promote either. So I think the route of travel needs to be looked at carefully, but on the other side, indeed, people want everything immediately. If you buy something, you want it immediately. Now, to be honest, it's digital. What you want is to make sure that you have the right on the things you are buying more than actually having the things in your book because you don't have it. So I think the industry is not clear yet about what they really want on that front, and it will probably take some time. The T+1, as I said, is happening, and Europe will follow, and I didn't answer the question, but actually I think as well it will be between 3 to 5 at max. Mm-hmm. But it will be interesting to see if there is really a push for going shorter on the B2B type of business. And I think the B2C or the C2C might actually evolve differently from the B2B. But I'm already on an instant payment. When I buy a fund, I need to have my cash on my account, otherwise I cannot buy I can't even pass my order. So for me, it's already kind of immediate settlement, even though it may take 3 days to get my funds, but actually I'm debited immediately, and I only see the credit later. So for me, it's already a T0. PayPal is a T0 for me. All those things is actually already T0, but it doesn't mean the industry on the backbone, the real one, needs to follow suit immediately.
Right. There's a big distinction between institutional and retail, right, on that front. I'm conscious of time, so I would like to ask our last Slido question, if we can get it up, just to make sure that we've asked you all the questions we need to. What do you think the optimal settlement cycle is? The one we're currently using in Europe, T+1, netted T+0, or instant? So this is not in any kind of time parameter. This is just whenever we get there. What is the most optimal cycle? Now, I've been monitoring some of the audience questions, and actually my last question is being reflected by a lot of the audience asking questions about CBDCs. Now, we'll be reliant on central banks to agree with each other to get to having a single euro replacement. How hard, what can we do? How hard is that going to be? And what do we do in the meantime with regards to a CBDC equivalent? Javier, in your perspective.
Well, as I was saying, I think CBDC, if we want to go digital, we need it, period. Otherwise, nobody wants to settle in Bitcoin, no? Or in Ethereum. It would be completely ridiculous. I wouldn't clearly, say that this is the way to go. So we need CBDC to make that happen, clearly. No? I understand, obviously, the ECB and the rest of central banks are looking into this and looking for proof of concept to see how it works, to see basically also what is the impact in the banking industry, which could be potentially important to look into. I don't think anybody has still the right environment or right solution, but to me it's unavoidable. I think it's completely unavoidable that we finally get a digital currency that is the central bank money, so it's safe, it's secure, and we obviously don't run into other issues with other digital currencies. And digital currencies are, in my opinion, are a no-brainer. This is going to happen, and I think it's good for the system that we have a CBDCs happening in the world. So, and some banks have already done it in proof of concept, like SNB in Switzerland. So I think this is going to work. The thing is how and what are the impacts. I know this is a big step into a new world and needs probably time and assessment, but to me it's a no-brainer.
Sure, and we don't want to be waiting 11 years like we waited for T2S, dare I say. Pierre?
Yeah, the more we shorten the settlement cycle, the more we need automated credit extension in the system, either by central banks or by commercial banks. And in the crypto world, they have a fancy name for that. They call it flash loans. In our world, we have a non-sexy word, to describe it, and it's called auto-collateralization in Target 2 Securities. But basically, that's the same, right? It's a credit extension mechanism that are triggered by some automated condition to secure the smooth settlement. So I think the more we shorten the settlement cycle, the more we need this kind of flash loans / auto-collateralization in the system. And CBDC may be one way to achieve that. But it's not just the central banks, I believe. It's also the commercial banks themselves that will have to strengthen their capabilities to monitor credit exposure on their clients and extend credit to their clients in order for the clients to settle in due time.
Sure. Should we see what our audience thinks about the optimal settlement cycle? Netted T+0 has proved popular.
Yeah.
Everyone expect that?
I think just on the CBDC, one more thing on the CBDC. I think CBDC is central bank money, right? So, and central bank money will continuously coexist with the commercial bank money. So, CBDC, I think, and we did actually a pilot a few months ago now with Banque de France to issue an OAT and to buy. It works perfectly well, so technology is capable of doing it. Not everybody can settle in central bank money though, so clearly it's only a small portion of, I mean, again, we move into the differentiation between the retailers and the and really the B2B type of things. But you will need to have this coordination between the CBDC and the commercial bank into DLT as well to make it work. But certainly CBDC is an interesting avenue, and that's probably going to the right direction in terms of new technology that will enable us to shorten the life cycle. So for me, it's a no-brainer. We will need to continue to work on that. But at the end of the day, I think the DLT aspect of it is not necessarily the most important. We are still talking about central bank money versus commercial bank money. And the ECB, like all the central banks, will need to follow the same push that we have to modernize our technology to support shortened time frame. And I think CBDC is just a way for the central banks to actually continue to be relevant in that space by providing central bank liquidity to the industry.
Sure. And we could, I mean, we've run out of time, unfortunately. We could talk probably for another hour on CBDCs alone, I believe. But hopefully you've got some good takeaways from our discussion. And I would like to say thanks to my panelists for a really exciting and interesting discussion about the plumbing. Who'd have thought it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.